feed is uniquely positioned to lead on sustainability. It connects the grain side of agriculture with the animal agriculture side of agriculture. And there's already so many positive things happening in feed that we just don't know about. So we want to both elevate those stories, help the industry understand what feed is doing, and then bring us together to collaborate on new initiatives. Because I think it's very clear that in sustainability, we can't do this alone, and the feed sector can't do it alone.
Before I turn it over to our great panel, I first want to ensure that we are all starting from a basic definition of LCAs. And so LCAs, we're talking about life cycle assessments, and basically an LCA is a technique for assessing the environmental impact of a product over its life cycle. And these can be done sometimes to help understand the impacts of a product, as a company may aim to prioritize improvements on products or processes, or it may be used to do something like compare between products for internal decision making. When you're setting up your life cycle assessment, you have to decide what you're going to focus on as your boundary and in the scope of the effort for the product or production system, and that has to be defined. So it could be that you're looking at a cradle to grave effort or a cradle to gate effort, they might say. You could be looking at a whole production system LCA, or you could be doing an LCA for a particular product. And I think also, as you'll hear today, that data sets matter as well. We've got Martin Guthrie joining us from Darling Ingredients. He is the Corporate Director of Environmental Affairs. We are pleased to have Erica Lane, who can speak from a whole production system, as she works as the Sustainability Manager from Iowa Select Farms, which is a pork operation in the Midwest. And then we have Tom Battagles joining us, and he's the Senior Manager of Global Strategy with BASF.
LCA is a great tool to try to identify gaps in our understanding of a process. All these examples that I'm talking about kind of do that. It informs our decision making and it enhances our knowledge. A specific example for Darling was a study, again, on avoided greenhouse gas emissions, that we capture in our raw materials. But this analysis kind of went a little step further, utilizing system expansion to calculate comparative emissions. So all of the various options for our raw materials coming in, as well as the various products we produce, it kind of utilized comparative emissions to analyze all those together. And while that was a very informative process, it was also kind of complicated. And so be prepared for some complexity in these systems, because agricultural systems can be kind of complex. LCA can influence how we innovate and improve our products. So over the past several years, we've completed numerous carbon footprint studies of our finished products in Europe. And these are basic LCA studies that follow ISO 14067, that methodology. And they're done basically to provide a more detailed insight into the carbon footprint of these products going into animal feed, and to better understand where the carbon contribution came from and how can best devote resources to improve our carbon footprints. And as you can gather from all this, LCA helps to inform decision making. On some level, it does this within all the examples that I've mentioned. We use these data to provide information. This has been happening for several years with our European operations, because there's been demand by those customers who are seeking answers for things like, what is the absolute carbon footprint of our product? How does our product contribute to the carbon footprint of their specific products? How can the carbon footprint of their product be reduced by using an alternative ingredient with a lower carbon footprint? For me, the most valuable aspect is in the use of LCA to benchmark performance, and then being a driver of that innovation by focusing on hotspots or opportunities.
We needed to have a better understanding of our greenhouse gas footprint on the product that we produce. And so we were able to work with Sustainable Environmental Consultants, which is a third-party company based here in Des Moines, to complete our first LCA last year with our 2020 data set. And from that LCA, we were able to see the breakdown of where all of our emissions are coming from. And our biggest contributor was through our feed at roughly 55%. And not only was our feed our biggest contributor, it was also the biggest opportunity for us to reduce our footprint overall. Next slide, please. So here are some of the learnings that we have gathered through our first experience getting an LCA completed on our product. There truly is value on accurate data. And I believe that this is true through our feed system, but also through our entire business. We've actually started new initiatives here at Iowa Select to better understand and how do we get more accurate data throughout our entire business. SEC actually had to use national averages on how Iowa corn and soybeans were produced and grown. And to our experience, that is not a good representation of how we produce feed here in Iowa. And so to us, that's not good enough. And we know that we could potentially reduce our emissions through true data, or like Laura had mentioned, primary sources. And we can reduce that by roughly 40% by just gathering that information. And so questions that we have is, how do we get that real primary source data? How can we make that data transaction throughout our supply chain? And how, as Iowa Select, as a producer in Iowa, how can we connect our manure acres through our feed acres?
So I just want to begin by painting a picture that we're on a journey, and I think that's been realized from the last discussions, and we're kind of in the early to mid stages of this journey. The first point of this journey is assuring that we have a harmonized methodology in order to create kind of credible and consistent life cycle studies. We have this already over the past few years. The UN FAO has the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance Guidelines, otherwise known as LEAP, that have been established for animal feed and animal protein value chains. The European Commission also has, from a policy level, the product environmental footprint rules for feed as well. And so with that methodology established, the next logical stop is, how do we get the data, as has been called out already a few times now. And from our perspective, we see the Global Feed LCA Institute, or GFLI, being that stop for reliable and consistent data. And I'll give some more insights on that shortly. From there, the journey continues from data. How do we begin to assemble tools and interconnect those tools to have really a dynamic approach, a much more efficient approach in terms of life cycle assessment and seamless integration that ultimately leads towards more and more integration, and ultimately an ecosystem that provides a digitally integrated value chain with proven primary data flows. The GFLI is industry supported and member driven. And the status of GFLI right now, in terms of the scope of the database that's available, is that we have more than 1,000 data sets that have been put together at country, state, and region level for a lot of the key ingredients within animal nutrition. The focus of GFLI is not just on carbon footprint, and that's one important aspect to take away here from the LCA side, is that LCA is really designed to understand the trade-offs and not just focus in on one environmental impact category. There's a lot of looking around the world, there's a lot of situations with drought currently. So if you're in a region where there's drought, carbon molecules aren't too much of a consideration if there's not adequate water. So that's just an example. The GFLI provides data on water, on eutrophication from excess nitrogen and phosphorus, land use, and other key metrics. Most of you are probably familiar with the concept of least cost formulation. That's the average practice globally that focuses on meeting not only the nutritional requirements, but the cost requirements, and assessing and optimizing on the cost of the commodities that go into animal nutrition. And what we've done with Optinix is to integrate the life cycle sustainability aspects alongside of the cost of nutrition, and actually interconnect with feed formulation systems, giving this opportunity to essentially have life cycle aspects available at the nutritionist and the formulator's fingertips, which is really critical, because 50 to 80% of the environmental impact of meat, milk, and eggs is coming from the animal feed. So at the end of the day, in order to operationalize a lot of these targets, we really have to, put it in the hands of those at an operational level. So ultimately, the drive here, there's been this mention a few times now of primary data, looking for more and more primary data. And that's definitely the future that we see going forward, so that the consumer at one point in the future can, at the retail level, essentially make a purchasing decision based on the exact footprint of the meat, milk, or eggs that they're looking at.
How do the LCA support your goal setting process? And the second one is, considering your experience in the topic, what trends are you seeing for demand of this type of data? And as I read that piece of the question, I'm thinking about, are your stakeholders asking for it? Like, what's driving you to do this other than your internal effort? Are there other people downstream or upstream that are asking you for this information? So Erica, I'll let you start.
Yes, thank you, Courtney, for those questions. So I'm going to reread your first one here. How do these LCA support your goal setting and process? So we, like I mentioned, we truly view sustainability as a holistic approach, but we know looking at what our customers are looking at, we want to make sure that we're in alignment throughout our supply chain. And so we understood and we've heard, that feed was a huge impact on pork production, but we really wanted to understand what that looked like for our internal production. And so that almost provided us more confidence of what direction to move forward with. And like I mentioned, we have a great unique opportunity to potentially view our manure acres and overlap that with our feed acres, since manure has a great impact on LCA and our overall footprint. And so long term, that's something that we would potentially look forward to. And then your next question was, considering your experience, what trends are you seeing for demand for this topic of data with others? As far as stakeholders, Iowa Farms is really customer driven, and we have evolved through customer and consumer demands throughout the last 30 years. And we know that this isn't going away. And so we want to continue to move forward with this. And personally, like I mentioned, I'm married to a farmer in Southern Iowa, and we also get hog manure on our ground as well, and we implement rye cover crops and do reduce tillage and no-till practices on our farms, because A, it's the right thing to do, and B, it improves soil health, and so ultimately helping the farmers to become more profitable.
Thanks. Martin?
So we see kind of maybe a big difference between what's going on in the US versus what's going on in Europe, and you kind of gather that from what I've said earlier. I think we're just now starting to see demand for this kind of data down our supply chain to the final manufacturers. In Europe, it's been going on for quite a while, and in fact, the LCA has been used as a tool to set goals there, in the sense that what informs our goals, to reduce water and to reduce energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions, and we've got LCAs year over year to kind of demonstrate that, and the ultimate customers over there have really kind of latched onto that, and I think view us as kind of a leader in demonstration of improvement in that regard. So that's kind of how you've used it there. I think we're on the verge of seeing more demand for it here, but it hasn't caught on quite as much as it has in Europe. So.
And Tom, since the question was originally addressed to you, I'll let you round out the conversation before we close out the webinar.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of what Erica and Martin just said. It's definitely, in terms of demand, it's definitely from a regional perspective, here and now in Europe, with many customers, stakeholders already actively using LCA as an approach for communicating and for tracking. The U.S. is I think coming on quickly, more from a market-driven perspective, as opposed to, of course, you have the market in Europe as well, but a policy-driven perspective, I think, has really been the push in from the European Union region. And I think in terms of, you know, the question around our goal setting in BSF, again, it goes to that automated process, a data collection process and so forth. And, you know, having that as the foundation for our enterprise strategy. And that goes, the data ultimately is getting passed along, you know, for innovation, for driving new technologies within BASF, and also for responding to stakeholders that are asking about our product footprint and having that data available.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for your and Erica for your participation and time on the panel today. I want to just take one more opportunity to thank you as panelists, but also to again thank our sponsors. They have been key to us being able to do not only these webinars, but the summit coming up in September.